The chamber of the Galactic High Council shimmered with iridescent light, casting long shadows across the assembly of alien dignitaries. Towering holograms of Earth flickered above the circular table, displaying humanity's brief but violent history, wars, revolutions, and an alarming capacity for adaptation. Supreme Chancellor Vexar, a towering figure with dark, chitinous armor, leaned forward. His voice echoed through the chamber. And yet, despite these primitive displays, they believed themselves worthy of standing among us. The council members scoffed. The Vahari, a species of translucent, cephalopod-like beings, pulsed with amusement. The Krell Dominion's warlords, towering reptilian brutes, let out guttural chuckles. Even the coldly logical Sithari, a race of cybernetic strategists, seemed unimpressed. Ambassador Til Rax of the Zithian Consortium waved a clawed hand dismissively. They lack the physiological advantages of the Krell, the intellect of the Sithari, the technological prowess of the Zaltar. They are a footnote in galactic history, nothing more. Vexazar smiled, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. Then let us prove it. He gestured, and the holograms shifted. A new projection appeared. A live feed from Eldar Prime, the legendary Colosseum where disputes were settled in blood. We shall test them, he continued. A simple contest of strength and skill. Our finest warrior against one of their own. If they truly believe themselves capable, let them survive a single round. The council murmured in agreement. Til Rax tapped his claw against the table. And when their champion falls, Vexazar's grin widened. Then humanity will learn its place. The decision was made. A summons was sent. Across the stars, a human was chosen. No one in that chamber considered, even for a moment, that they might regret it. The air on Eldar Prime was thick with the scent of battle, ozone from discharged energy weapons, the acrid tang of spilled blood, and the faint metallic hum of force fields shimmering around the Colosseum's perimeter. Thousands of alien spectators filled the towering arena, their voices a chaotic symphony of growls, screeches, and guttural war cries. In the center of it all, standing alone on the battlefield, was a single human. Captain Elias Voss surveyed the scene with calm, calculating eyes. He adjusted the sleeves of his worn-out combat fatigues, his only armor a reinforced tactical vest. Unlike the towering, monstrous warriors surrounding him, he carried no visible weapon. The murmurs among the crowd swelled into laughter. "This is their champion?" scoffed a Krell warlord, his reptilian tail thrashing against the ground. The Vahari emissary's translucent body pulsed with amusement. "They send a soft-skinned creature with no natural defenses. This is not a contest. It is an execution." High, above the arena, Supreme Chancellor Vexazar leaned back in his throne, the satisfaction evident in his mandible-covered grin. "Begin!" A massive tractor gladiator stomped forward, a mountain of muscle and chitin, standing over 9 feet tall. Its 4 arms each held a different weapon: a plasma axe, an energy blade, a gravity hammer, and a serrated glaive. The crowd roared as the behemoth charged, but Voss didn't move. The tractor swung its gravity hammer, the air around the weapon bending as it descended. Yet in the blink of an eye, Voss sidestepped, the hammer crashing into the ground with an earth-shattering force. Before the alien could react, Voss closed the distance. With brutal efficiency, he twisted under the gladiator's second swing, delivered a sharp elbow to its exposed throat, and followed up with a precise strike to the pressure point between its chitinous plates. The tractor staggered, it gasped. Its multiple eyes widened in disbelief. Then it collapsed. Silence fell over the arena. The gathered warriors stared in shock. A combatant of the tractor's stature should have taken at least a dozen direct hits to falter. Yet this fragile human had brought it down in seconds, with nothing but his bare hands. From his throne, Vexar's expression darkened. Voss dusted off his hands and exhaled. Is that it? The arrogance of the Galactic Elite was about to be shattered. The Colosseum of Eldar Prime had seen countless battles, gladiators from across the stars, brutal duels that ended in spectacle, warriors rising and falling in pools of their own blood. But never in its long history had the arena fallen silent like this. Not after a victory, certainly not after a human's victory. Captain Elias Voss stood over the unconscious tractor gladiator, his stance relaxed, breathing steady. He didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. He simply waited. The crowd, thousands of elite warriors, generals, and high-born nobles, stared in stunned disbelief. Voss tilted his head, scanning the onlookers. Still think I'm a joke? From the towering balcony, Supreme Chancellor. Vexazar's mandibles twitched with irritation. The tracteur was unprepared, he growled. A lucky strike. He turned to his personal champion, General Zalvarek, a warrior whose name alone was enough to silence entire battlefields. You will break him, Vexar ordered. Zalvarek descended into the arena, his presence alone drawing gasps. From the crowd, 12 feet tall, his thick obsidian-plated armor gleamed under the harsh lights. His forearms flexed as he unsheathed dual plasma scimitars, their edges vibrating with deadly energy. This was no mindless brute. This was a seasoned warlord, a master of combat across 100 campaigns. Voss exhaled slowly. All right. Now things get interesting. A loud chime rang through the arena. The duel had begun. Zalvarek moved like lightning, his massive frame deceivingly fast. His forearms attacked in perfect synchronicity, each blade a blur of motion. Voss dodged, a sidestep, a pivot, a twist. His movements flowed like water. One blade missed by inches. Another scorched past his shoulder, but he never stopped moving. Zalvarek snarled, pressing the assault. He feinted high, then slashed low. Voss jumped, flipping over the blade in a seamless arc. The audience gasped. He landed in a crouch, barely breaking stride. Then, in a blur, he lunged forward, his fist connected with Zalvarek's armored ribs. Not a strike meant to kill, but to test. A sharp clang echoed through the arena. The warlord staggered back, not from pain, from shock. He's fast. Zalvarek had fought thousands of enemies. He had seen speed, he had seen agility. But this human, this fragile creature, moved like nothing he had ever encountered. Voss pressed. The advantage. He ducked under the next attack, his movements impossibly precise. A swift elbow to the warlord's wrist sent one plasma scimitar clattering to the ground, then another strike to the knee. Zalvarek stumbled. This isn't possible, the warlord roared in frustration, his form blurring with speed-enhanced cybernetics. He lunged with all his strength. Voss saw the attack coming. Instead of dodging, he stepped forward. The warlord's eyes widened as Voss closed the gap, getting inside his reach, past his blades, and drove a brutal palm strike into Zalvarek's chest. A thunderous shockwave rippled through the arena as the warlord was lifted off his feet and sent flying across the battlefield. He crashed into the stone wall, the impact so powerful it cracked the surface. The arena fell dead silent. Voss stood tall, dusting off his knuckles. His expression didn't change. In the stands, the alien warlords, predators from across the galaxy, shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't luck. This wasn't trickery. This was humanity, Supreme Chancellor. Vexazar's grip tightened on his throne. This was a problem. The silence that followed Zalvarek's defeat was deafening. The greatest warrior in the Chancellor's ranks lay motionless, embedded in the cracked stone wall. He wasn't dead, but he wasn't getting up either. Voss stood in the center of the Colosseum, rolling his shoulders. His breathing remained steady, his pulse calm. He had fought harder battles before. This was just a warm-up. The audience, A sea of powerful alien warlords, elite military strategists, and galactic nobility didn't know how to react. Some looked shocked, some looked afraid, but one expression was universal: disbelief. Voss exhaled. "Right. Who's next?" Enter the instructor from the highest balcony. A deep voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Enough!" The Chancellor's personal combat instructor, Grandmaster Kale Rax, descended into the arena. His four piercing golden eyes locked onto Voss with an intensity that could have melted steel. He was old, older than the Empire itself. But no one in the audience dared underestimate him, because he was legendary. He had trained the greatest warlords of the Empire. He had never been defeated, and now he was looking at Elias Voss like an insect that needed crushing. "The human is fast," Kelrax said, his voice carrying across the arena. "Skilled, but speed alone does not make a warrior." Voss smirked. "Oh, this should be fun." The duel was set. Kyle Rax did not wield weapons. He didn't need them. His bare hands had shattered power armor and crushed exoskeletal warriors like paper. As the duel began, he stood perfectly still, waiting. Voss circled, him analyzing. No stance, no openings, but that meant something. The old warrior wasn't lazy, he was deliberate. "He's baiting me." Voss knew an elite counter-striker when he saw one. Still, he had to test. He struck first, a sharp feint, followed by a lightning-fast kick to the ribs. Kale Rax moved like a ghost, not dodging, redirecting. His open palm caught Voss's leg, shifting his momentum just enough to unbalance him. Then, a brutal strike to the chest. Voss flew backward, rolling mid-air to absorb the impact. He landed in a low crouch, a bruise forming where the hit landed. The crowd gasped. Kyle Rax remained where he stood, unshaken. "You move well, human," he said, flexing his fingers, "but you are predictable." Voss wiped blood from his lip and smiled. Finally, a real challenge. They clashed again, this time faster, more ruthless. Voss attacked with speed and precision, striking from different angles, changing rhythms, using feints, twists, and impossible footwork. Kelrax absorbed it all. Every blow was redirected, every movement anticipated. Then Kelrax struck, a single palm strike to Voss's side. His ribs cracked. Voss staggered back, breath hitching. Kelrax didn't let up. A flurry of precise strikes targeted Voss's limbs, forcing him onto the defensive. For the first time, Voss was in real danger. Most warriors, even the greatest of their kind, would have broken by now. "Voss," he grinned, "you hit like a truck, old man." Kale Rax's golden eyes narrowed. "And yet you are still standing." Voss adjusted his stance. He had been playing Kale Rax's game. Time to change the rules. Kale Rax prepared for Voss's next strike, but instead, Voss went for the ground. With a sudden roll, he swept Kale Rax's legs out from under him. The Grandmaster barely managed to adjust, flipping mid-air, but that half-second was enough. Voss was already moving. He grabbed Kale Rax mid-air and slammed him into the ground. The impact shook the Colosseum. The audience froze. Kale Rax had never been thrown before. The old master recovered instantly, leaping back to his feet, but now he was frowning. Voss was learning, adapting. Kale Rax launched forward with inhuman speed, fists like comets. Voss dodged, countered, evaded. He fought differently now. His movements erratic, unpredictable. He combined styles, mixed techniques, improvised. Kale Rax was fast, Voss was faster, and then Voss feinted high, then pivoted low and delivered a devastating rising knee to Kale Rax's jaw. The Grandmaster's head snapped back. He stumbled for the first time in his life. Kyle Rax was off balance. The arena held its breath. Voss didn't hesitate. He surged forward, delivering a final strike, a brutal elbow to the chest. Kyle Rax was sent flying. He hit the ground hard and did not rise. The Colosseum was silent. Then, a single, loud thud. Kyle Rax had struck his fist against the ground, a warrior's signal of submission. The crowd erupted, not in cheers, in shock. The greatest instructor of the Empire had been defeated by a human, supreme chancellor. Vexizar clenched his claws around his throne, his mandibles twitching in fury. This wasn't supposed to happen. Humans were supposed to be weak. They were supposed to break. But Elias Voss had just done the impossible, and in that moment, the entire Galactic Elite realized their mistake. The dust had barely settled. Grandmaster Kael'Rax lay motionless on the Colosseum floor, his chest rising and falling in steady, measured breaths. Defeated, a warrior who had never lost a fight had just been brought to his knees by a human. The arena was silent, but not from reverence. It was the kind of silence that came from absolute disbelief, a silence that bordered on fear. Elias Voss exhaled, rolling his shoulders as if he wasn't standing in the center of the greatest upset in galactic history. The Supreme Chancellor, Vexizar, sat on his gilded throne, his claws gripping the armrests so tightly that the metal groaned under the pressure. Unacceptable, he hissed. His advisors whispered hurriedly in his ears, their voices urgent, nervous. What does this mean? Is he using forbidden technology? Is he even human? But Vexizar ignored them all. His gaze locked onto Voss, and for the first time in his long reign, he felt uncertainty. Voss turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing as he noticed movement above. The Chancellor was rising from his throne. Gasps rippled through the Colosseum. This was unheard of. Supreme Chancellor Vexizar was the highest authority in the Empire, a ruler who commanded entire fleets with a gesture. He was not a warrior. He didn't need to be. His champions fought for him, his elites killed in his name, and yet, now, he stepped forward. Why? Because if he didn't, the message would be clear. A human had defeated the best of them. If no one stopped him, it would mean only one thing, that humans were superior, and that was unacceptable. An unfair fight? No, a death sentence. Elias Voss, the Chancellor's voice rang out, you have defied all expectations. You have humiliated my finest warriors, and now you stand in my Colosseum, alive and unbroken. Voss tilted his head. Was that respect? But I will not allow this farce to continue. The Chancellor gestured, and the walls of the Colosseum rumbled. Panels slid open, revealing rows upon rows of weapons. Blades that could cut through starship hulls. Energy whips that could flay flesh from bone. Gauntlets that could punch through. Titanium armor. Vexizar descended into the arena. He walked toward the weapons and selected none. Instead, he removed his royal mantle, exposing his true form. Voss's smirk faded. The Supreme Chancellor had always been seen in his regal robes, towering over his subjects like a god, but now he was something else entirely. His carapace gleamed under the artificial lights, a fusion of organic armor and bioengineered enhancements. His forearms, hidden beneath ceremonial silk, flexed with unnatural strength. His mandibles clicked once, and the air around him seemed to vibrate. I do not need weapons, human. Voss rolled his shoulders. Neither do I. The audience stirred, murmuring in hushed, frantic tones. This wasn't just a duel, it was an execution. Vexizar had fought only once before, and when he had, entire species had gone extinct. The moment the duel was signaled, Voss barely had time to react. Vexizar was fast, too fast. The Chancellor blurred forward, closing the gap in an instant. His first strike was a devastating palm thrust, aimed at Voss's ribcage. Voss barely dodged, feeling the shockwave as the air itself cracked from the sheer force. Then, the second strike, a low, sweeping blow designed to cripple. Voss jumped just in time, twisting mid-air, only for two more arms to lash out simultaneously. One caught his shoulder, the other slammed into his chest. Voss hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact. His ribs screamed in protest. The audience cheered. Their emperor was not just winning, he was obliterating the human. Survival against a god. Voss pushed himself up, spitting blood. His vision blurred for a moment, but he adjusted. He always adjusted. Vexazar didn't hesitate. He pressed forward, relentless. Each strike was faster than the last. Each movement calculated, merciless. Voss was on the defensive. Now he dodged, redirected, absorbed the least lethal hits, but he wasn't winning. He was barely surviving. But then he noticed something. For all his speed, for all his power, Vexazar fought with patterns. He was precise. Too precise. He had never needed to adapt because he had never faced someone like Elias Voss. Turning the tide, Voss took a deep breath. Then he did something insane. He stopped dodging. The next blow came, a perfect textbook strike aimed at his temple. Instead of evading, Voss leaned into it, twisting his body just enough to redirect the force, not avoiding, absorbing. It hurt, but not as much as it should have. And now Vexazar was open. Voss struck, a devastating human-made punch directly into the Chancellor's throat. The impact sent Vexazar staggering back. The crowd gasped. For the first time, the Emperor had been struck, and Voss was just getting started. The impossible knockout Vexazar roared. His movements became wild, erratic. Voss had gotten in his head, and now he exploited it. Ducking, weaving, using every trick humans had ever learned from thousands of years of war, fighting dirty, fighting smart. Then, the opening. Voss feinted left, forcing the Chancellor to shift his weight. Then he drove his knee into Vexazar's gut. The Emperor lurched forward, and Voss finished it, a brutal final strike to the jaw. Vexazar's head snapped back. His massive form collapsed to the ground and did not rise. The Colosseum fell into absolute silence. The Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Empire lay unmoving. The strongest being in the known universe had just been defeated by a human. No one spoke. No one breathed. Then Kale Rax moved. The old Grandmaster, still bruised, still aching, raised his hand and slammed his fist against the ground. Once, a warrior's signal of respect. The arena followed. One by one, thousands of warriors struck the ground with their fists, a deafening roar of recognition. Because today, the galaxy learned a truth they had refused to believe. Humans were not weak. They were not prey. They were unstoppable. The echoes of fists pounding against the Colosseum floor still thundered in Elias Voss's ears. Thousands of warriors, once convinced of human inferiority, now acknowledged what they had just witnessed. Their Supreme Chancellor, the mightiest of their kind, lay motionless before them, defeated by a human. The realization sank in like a stone. Everything the Galactic Elite had built their power upon, their belief in their own supremacy, their unshakable confidence in their martial dominance, had just crumbled. Voss exhaled, rolling his bruised shoulder. He had felt the raw power of Vexazar's attacks, the sheer ferocity behind every strike, and yet he had won, because power alone had never been the deciding factor in battle. It was something more. And now, it was time they understood that. Slow, pained movement. The Supreme Chancellor Vexazar groaned as he pushed himself up. His mandibles clicked, his second set of arms trembling under his own weight. He had never been beaten before. He had never even conceived of losing. And yet, he had fallen before a human. He looked up, meeting Voss's gaze. For the first time in his long rule, he felt something alien. Respect. Voss extended a hand. The Chancellor stared at it. Gasps rippled through the audience. A human offering aid to an emperor. An insult, a challenge. And yet, Vexazar took it. His massive clawed hand gripped Voss's forearm. The Colosseum held its breath. Then Vexazar laughed, deep, rumbling, almost amused. "You are not like the others," he said, his voice hoarse. Voss smirked. "Neither are you." The Supreme Chancellor let out a slow exhale and turned to the stunned crowd. "This human," he declared, "has done what none of you thought possible, what none of you believed. could happen. He looked around, his voice stronger now. And if you do not learn from this, if you do not adapt, then you will be left behind. His gaze locked onto Kyle Rax, the Grandmaster. Tell them why he won. Kyle Rax, still aching from his own defeat, stepped forward. He studied Voss for a long moment before turning his attention to the assembled warriors. You all saw what happened. You saw the Chancellor's speed, his power, his mastery of battle. He let the words hang in the air, and yet he fell. Murmurs spread through the Colosseum. Confusion, uncertainty. Why? Kyle Rax continued. Because power alone is not enough. It never was. He gestured toward Voss. Humans fight differently. Not because they are stronger, not because they are faster, but because they have spent their entire history learning how to fight against those who are stronger, those who are faster, those who should have crushed them. He pointed at the Chancellor. You have never had to adapt, never had to struggle against something greater than yourself. He turned back to the warriors. But humans, they were never the strongest species, never the fastest, never the largest. And yet they have never stopped winning. Silence. Then Voss spoke. You call yourselves the pinnacle of warriors, Voss said, his voice carrying across the Colosseum. You believe your strength makes you superior, that your traditions make you untouchable. He took a slow step forward. But strength alone is nothing. Another step. You lost today because you've never had to evolve. You've never had to fight for survival, to claw your way up from the dirt with nothing but your will and desperation. His eyes swept over the gathered elites. Humans, we were prey once, we were weak once, but we learned, we adapted. We turned our own weaknesses into weapons. His gaze returned to Vexazar. And that is why we win. The Chancellor studied him, then nodded. Then teach them, he said simply. Voss raised an eyebrow. What? Vexazar turned to the warriors who had once mocked Voss's presence, the ones who had dismissed him as insignificant. You have learned the first lesson today, the Chancellor declared, that your arrogance is a weakness. His eyes darkened. Now you will learn the second. He turned back to Voss. You will train them. The warriors stiffened, their pride flaring. Train. Under a human. Unthinkable outrage bubbled in the crowd, but the Chancellor's next words silenced them. Or you can remain as you are. Weak. No one spoke after that, because they knew the truth now, and the truth could not be ignored. Later, as Voss walked through the Colosseum corridors, Kyle Rax strode beside him. Do you understand what you've done? The Grandmaster asked. Voss exhaled. Yeah. And? Voss smirked. Guess I've got work to do. Kyle Rax nodded approvingly. Then let's begin. And just like that, the greatest warriors in the galaxy began their training under a human, and the galaxy would never be the same. The galaxy had changed. The echoes of battle still lingered in the minds of the Galactic Elite. The duel that shouldn't have been possible had been witnessed by thousands, and now whispers spread across the stars of a human, not a conqueror, not an emperor, not a warlord, a teacher. The Supreme Chancellor had spoken. The Grandmaster had yielded. The greatest warriors in the galaxy had been humbled. And Elias Voss? He had become something more. It began with a few, the young, the curious, those unburdened. By arrogance, they came to watch. Then they came to learn. At first, they struggled. Their bodies had been shaped by generations of power and dominance. Their minds had been conditioned to believe that strength alone was victory. Voss broke them of that illusion. They learned to move, not with brute force, but with precision. They learned to strike, not with reckless might, but with purpose. And when they fought, they began to think. They adapted. And that was when the real Change began. The old guard resists. Not everyone accepted this new path. Among the Galactic Elite, there were those who refused to learn. "We do not need human teachings," they sneered. "We are the pinnacle of warriors." Voss only shrugged. "Then, prove it." And one by one, those who mocked him fell the same way their chancellor had fallen. Some refused to return. Some, humbled, asked to be trained. And in time, even the most stubborn began to see the truth. A name spoken in shadows beyond the Colosseum, beyond the warrior academies, beyond the throne of the Supreme Chancellor, the name Elias Voss carried weight. The elite whispered it with caution, the young spoke it with reverence, the arrogant spat it with resentment, but no one ignored it. Because now every warrior in the galaxy had to ask themselves one question: could I stand against the human? And for the first time in their long, proud history, many were afraid of the answer. Voss stood at the edge of the Colosseum, watching the next generation train. They fought differently now. They moved differently. Their world was no longer one of raw power, but of adaptation. Kelrak stepped beside him. "You've started something you can't stop." Voss smirked. "Good. Because this was only the beginning. A legend had been born, and the galaxy would never be the same again.